Hello and welcome to Career Center. I'm Kimberly White, Executive Director of the Community Career Center, a resource center located in Naperville, providing job search and professional growth support to its clients. Joining me today is Executive Coach Virginia McLaughlin to share the value of networking and how it has been instrumental in her career journey and success. Virginia, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I have the privilege of knowing you as a volunteer at our center, and I know that you give wonderful advice to our clients, so I'm excited to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we kind of delve into all of this, share a little bit about yourself. I know you've had an interesting career journey, and I'd love for our audience to hear about that.
Yeah, I may be a poster child for somebody who has a very complex kind of career where I started in one place and ended up in a completely different place. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been a great career. I started as a French teacher. I got out of yes,
oui.
Yeah, exactement. Oui. Précisément. I got a degree in French and English with a minor in psychology. And went back and taught at the school that I had gone to high school in. My French teacher hired me back, which is probably the first networking. And
did you even know it was networking back then?
Oh, of course not. I didn't know networking until I joined the Career Center. So you know, I didn't know what I was doing. But as I reflect back on it, that's what was happening. And I was the kind of teacher that got the kids singing the Marseillaise and did escargot in the school and in the schoolroom and had the halls smelling like butter and garlic. And
sounds yummy.
Yeah, and kids coming out saying, Mrs. McLaughlin, she had us eating snails. Do you believe it? But then they came to me with problems, and they, you know, I was a young teacher, and they came to me with problems, and so I went back and got a degree in counseling psychology. Okay. And that
as a result of the students.
Of the students, yeah. So then I came back and counseled for a while, but very shortly after that I stopped teaching. And I resigned to raise my kids, and I stayed at home for 7 years. And then I had this big gap where I wasn't working at all. It's like so many of our people that come to the Career Center have. I had this gap, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I can remember a friend of my husband saying, "Well, the trouble with you, Virginia, is you don't have any observable skills. You have no visible skills." And I thought, yeah, you know, he's right. And but then somebody I knew who I was volunteering, somebody I knew who was volunteering was starting a training company, and that's how I got into training, and that's how I got, you know, the whole rest of the trajectory of my career until I've retired several times. My last retiring was as a partner in a large consulting firm in New York, where I got to design and lead big training, leadership development programs for leaders in companies like Novartis and Bank of America, and you know, just a lot of different things, different places, and they were leadership and development and coaching programs, and we did these all over. I had a team of other coaches that I worked with, and we did them in Bangkok and Budapest and Istanbul and Paris and London, and so it was this amazing kind of a career, and I would never have been able to do that. I still look back and I think, how did that happen? But each time along the way, it was somebody who knew me and who brought me into this company and brought me into that company and brought me into another company. So it
just kind of evolves.
It does. It evolves, and so when I talk to somebody at the Career Center, you know, they have no idea what it's going to be like in 10 or 20 years for them.
Especially nowadays, because it really does change.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, that's sort of how it evolved.
So I want to go back to when you were a teacher, and you said the students, they came to you with problems. So what part of that did you at what point did you say, you know what, I need to go back for counseling, I need to be able to help these kids, and then how that kind of parlayed into you becoming a consultant and doing
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was a good entree into doing the kind of work I did with leaders. That I call it practical psychology, and it.
I mean, was it one particular student? Was it just one? You know what?
You know, this is back many decades before we really talked about kids with the problems that they have now in terms of drugs and just some of the other things, the pressures. But even back then, they had such stress, and they talked to me about college, and they talked to me about family things, and sometimes I'd have kids coming over to the house, you know, and they you know, just they had all sorts of issues, and I didn't really feel like I could, I had the wherewithal to help them, and that's why I went back to get the degree.
Yeah, that's good. And okay, and then you also, I want to come back to the gap thing, but you talked about observable skills. What was he specifically saying when he
I asked him? I said, you know, because I had 2 degrees at that point. I had teaching experience. But in my mind, it didn't count for anything after, you know, 6 or 7 years staying at home. And he said, well, you know, you don't type, and you don't take shorthand. You know, this is a while ago. And, you know, and so.
I remember those days.
Yeah. And so, and I internalized that.
Yeah.
Somebody said that to me the other day at the Career Center, and I said, oh no. And we talked about the skills needed in being at home, even.
Yeah.
And but at that point, I was volunteering, and you know, this woman said, well, could you come and just could you edit our workbook? They just started this training program, training company, and can you edit the workbook? And I had a major in English too, and I said sure, and I did that, and I looked through it, and then it evolved into me doing some of the training with them, and I learned that I could design programs and keep people interested in teaching what we were teaching back then. We were teaching things entirely different, you know, presentation skills and that sort of thing. So, yeah. So
good. So. Now I want to talk about the gap, because you mentioned the gap, and that always comes up, especially with parents who decide to stay home and raise their kids, or, you know, taking care of a parent, a sick family member. How did you explain your gap? Because you said it was a pretty long gap. How did you explain that? As you, I mean, you went into consulting right after that, so.
Yeah, yes, I did. Consulting, we were calling it training at the time, but it was really, a lot of it was consulting. Even then, we did one-on-one coaching with people who were in the sessions. And I didn't really have to explain it back then, because I knew the person, she knew my background, and you know, knew that I was looking to do something. It was either going down this trajectory, or I was going to open an antique store in Naperville, which would have been a completely different pathway for me.
Absolutely.
I'd probably be doing
very different things.
Yes. So this is a good pathway for me to start.
Right. So you continue to work as an executive coach.
I do.
What similarities do you see being an executive coach in what you do now, and as well as what you do at the center with some of the clients that you meet with?
You know, I wasn't, when I started with the Career Center, I wasn't sure there was going to be a lot of overlap in what I do, but there's tremendous overlap. Executive coaching is a lot about listening to people and understanding their story, and in a lot of the programs, the leadership programs I did, I had to do that very quickly. I had 20 minutes here and half an hour here, and you know, 45 minutes here with somebody, and so I've learned to do that pretty quickly in these hour programs that we have with people at the Career Center. But it's a lot about listening and understanding their stories, and helping them see their strengths. So much of what I think is needed when you're applying for a job, when you're looking for a job, is confidence building. So it's helping them see and own their strengths, and then to plan on what they're going to do next. Because I think that's another thing. You know, what do I do next? You know, I've sent out these 100 resumes. Well, surely that will do it for me, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. So when you're talking to them about confidence building and their strengths, is it easy to correlate those two things together when you're meeting with clients so that they see it? Like, what are some of the things that you're sharing with them around that?
Well, you know, in executive coaching, you can do a lot of assessments, and we often do assessments so that we have it sort of in black and white, and they can agree or disagree.
Yeah, but it's there.
But it's there, yeah, in black and white, and sometimes we do 360. So this is not only what you think about yourself, but this is what other people think about you. So it's sometimes you have to dig a little bit more with the people that we work with at the Career Center.
But you get there.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
You know, you hope so.
Yeah. When you meet with clients who do speak about that gap, how do you how do you tell them to explain that gap when they're?
Well, I ask them to explain it to me. You know, sometimes we do mock interviews and that sort of thing, and so I ask them to explain it to me. And sometimes they'll explain it in a very negative way, and I'll ask them to reframe it, and we'll talk about how you frame things. So if you frame that as, you know, that gap of staying home with your children, and, you know, as the most important thing that I could do at that particular time in my life, and these are the things I've learned, and this is what I want to apply all that to, then it's a different story. It's a different
Versus,
frame.
oh my gosh, bottles and diapers all day.
Now I have no visible skills.
No, that's good. And then storytelling is very important in all of this.
Absolutely. I think people who have a big gap feel like they don't have as many good stories. People who've been employed feel like they have a lot of stories. But absolutely, you know, we can. What was the hardest thing about this time that, you know, you've been off, or what have you, you know, what was the most interesting thing you did during that time that you think you can apply to the next thing? So yeah, I think the stories are really. That's a good point.
Is it? How do you? Are most of the clients that you're seeing when they're, you know, re-entering the workforce, are they looking to come in kind of where they were, maybe at a higher level, or most people just kind of looking to go in and kind of get their feet wet again and then start moving up? Like, what's your advice there?
You know, the thing that I love about the work we do, which is new to me. I mean, the whole career thing is kind of new to me, but you get such a diverse group of people and situations, and so every time somebody comes into you, it's something different. So it could be somebody. Today I had somebody who was employed and is looking for something else. I've had people who've been out for 6 months, who've been out for 2 years. It's all different, and it really is about letting them tell you what is going on.
Story, right?
What's going on for them, what are they looking to do, and then helping them figure out sort of what to do next.
And those similarities are there between coaching at the center as well as your executive coaching.
Similar skills, different situation. The people I coach, executive coaching, they have jobs and often have big, challenging, sometimes awful jobs. And so, you know, and these people are people who in the center are looking for something, looking for the next thing.
All right. Let's take a break. Up next, more career coaching advice from executive coach Virginia McLaughlin. We'll be right back after these public service announcements.
They call me Prince like I'm royalty or something. But the places I've lived ain't no palaces. So I don't need grilled salmon or a new scratching post. Just give me a cardboard box and a can of tuna and we're good. You can even change my name. I'm cool being the kitty formerly known as Prince.
Meet the scan, a simple procedure whose mission is to detect lung cancer early.
I'm here to save you!
But I feel fine.
That's great, but you may still be at high risk for lung cancer.
Oh man, that's a new fence.
If you smoke, early detection could save your life. Learn more at savedbythescan.org.
Welcome back to Career Center. I am Kimberly White with Executive Coach Virginia McLaughlin to talk about leadership and executive coaching and all that fun stuff.
Oh, okay.
I know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you've been doing a great job with clients at the center, and I know what you do outside is really work with executives that are currently working or could possibly be in transition. And I know the tips and things that you share really go across the board. But I want to talk a little bit about just leadership and how that applies to job search and leadership in general in the workplace. What are your thoughts? I've heard recently that, when you're in a job search, you don't need to worry about leadership, but you really do.
Ooh.
Yeah.
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 There's something called self-leadership, and that's a big piece of all leadership. The
self-leadership. Define that.
Understanding yourself, knowing yourself, knowing what you're good at, knowing what your values are, what's important to you, having a focus or a direction you're going. All of that is important as a leader. When I'm working with leaders, I'm often talking to them about, so what are your priorities? What are your values? What's your mission? What's your purpose? And I think that's true for people looking for a job, for a career.
If someone's not
forward.
able to define that, is that when you suggest assessments? And let's talk about.
Could be.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll give them a list of questions to answer, and then we'll talk about them, and then I'll make suggestions from what I hear. A lot of it is focus, because it's really hard to focus your leadership when you're leading a big team. And some of the people that I work with, I have hundreds of people who ultimately, maybe even more than that, working for them. And for them to be able to set direction, they really have to have a focus. They have to know where they're going and what's where they want the organization to go, where they want their team to go, and so it's that's really a key word for them: focus and clarity.
Focus and clarity.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that sometimes you will do these assessments, and sometimes you get a little pushback. So, how do you handle that when you're in that situation? Because, like you said, it's in black and white. So, how do you get a leader to understand, like, this is real? And so let's.
Some people don't. Some people kind of block it out. Not many, but some people do. Some people pick the pieces that they want to look at. But generally, if I ask them, so how does that show up? Where does that get in your way? There's one assessment that we use that's called a derailer assessment.
Derailer?
And it's one of my favorite ones, because it has the research behind it is very intense, and it has 11 areas that start out as strengths and can derail a career, derail results, derail relationships. And that's a hard one for people to see, because sometimes there are often things that they see as strengths that are working against them in certain circumstances under stress. So I'll say, okay, so when you get under stress, how does that show up? That's often where people will say, oh yeah, he's really good, but, she's really good, but she's kind of scattered, or he's really good, but he has a temper, or those kinds of things.
How do you, when you're going through this, how do you, when people are, putting it off on someone else, how do you kind of rein that back in and say, no, let's look at you, like you're the reason why we're here today, or how do you do that?
You just do it.
Because I would just imagine that when you're, when you're at a certain level, it's just harder to kind of get people to focus, right, on that.
Yeah. There has to be I never take a coaching engagement unless there's chemistry, unless the person has met me and they feel like I get a sense that they trust me and I like them. So if there isn't that chemistry, usually they go someplace else or it just, it doesn't happen. So there's a level of trust there, and so that like at the center, you have to develop that trust and that chemistry really fast because you only have a certain amount of time. But then it's easier to be able to say no. I'm trying to think if there's anybody that I've coached. There's one person I can think of that I coached a number of years ago that just I couldn't get her to come around.
Yeah.
But
For
not
the most
usually.
part, they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So at what point would somebody reach out to you? Is it because, someone above them has suggested that they reach out to an executive coach? Or
generally.
do people kind of sometimes say, you know what, I think I need someone? And then do they keep you long term or no?
Some coaches do. The way I work is that I coach for 6 months. I set up a contract with them for 6 months, and usually it comes from the organization. Usually, and not always, but usually it comes from somebody in HR or their superior that says, we're moving into this area, or we're moving you into this job, and I think it'd be really useful for you to have somebody to talk to. And then they'll call me, the head of HR or whatever will call me and say, this is the situation, would you be interested? And I'll say, generally I say yes, and then I talk to the person. And sometimes I talk to them and I say, it sounds to me like you need a coach with this experience, and that isn't really where I have a great deal of expertise. Or, sometimes they'll be in different parts of the world or the U.S. and I'll say, it sounds to me like it would be really useful for you to have somebody right there for you. So yeah.
So most of it is in person, but you do things over the phone.
Yeah, I do things, and more and more I do them over the phone or Skype or FaceTime or something like that. Yeah.
Do you find that, you always hear it's lonely at the top, right? So typically you're dealing with more senior people.
It is lonely at the top.
Yeah. How, is it? Are you just talking career stuff? Sometimes does it veer off of that? From that, do you get? Yeah. Does it become personal sometimes? As they're dealing, because they kind of
your whole person.
Yeah. How does that?
I'm not a life coach.
Okay.
So, and I tell them that.
Okay.
But sure, we talk about family. We talk about how that relates. Even in what I call fast cycle coaching, which is when I'm coaching in a leadership program, I will find out things like, somebody is coming to this big job and they have a spouse or a partner at home that has a terminal disease, or they'll have a child that's has real problems or whatever. And I sometimes think, how does that person come to work every day and do their job when they've got that? So yeah, we'll go there. But
sometimes it's needed. I mean, it's part of their day-to-day.
Yeah, we're all human.
Yeah.
And leadership is really, really hard. I think that's the one thing that I've learned over all these years of working with different leaders, is that it's not an easy thing. And we always think, that's where you want to be. It's tough.
Yeah, and why is that? What are some things you can share around that?
It's tough because it is lonely. You don't have a lot of people that you can go to that you really trust, that you can, if you're struggling with something, if you're struggling with a decision, if you have to let somebody go, if you have to close a department, if you have to, if you're not getting the support you need, it's and everybody has weaknesses. We all have things that we think. We don't do as well, or we're really arrogant and think we can do everything, and we don't understand why everybody else doesn't think we're so wonderful.
Right.
So it is.
Do you find that more often than not?
No, I don't.
That's good.
I find that every once in a while. Every once in a while, but not very often.
Yeah, and I think it's good for clients to see that. leaders, because I think we all have in our mind like what it must be like to be that person.
If I could only be the boss, why don't they do X?
I can't imagine that. There are jobs I definitely would not ever want to do.
Oh, no. I don't know as though I'd like to do any of the jobs of the people I coach.
Because it's a lot. So leaders, when we talk about leaders, I know oftentimes some people don't see themselves as leaders.
No, that's true. That's true.
But everyone really is. They have they possess some sort of leadership skills. So,
Moms, if you're a mom at home, you're using leadership skills. They're the most important leadership skills.
Yeah, so it's really important for clients to recognize that, to not think that you're not a leader. There's something there.
And that you have influence. You have a lot of influence in that interview. You have a lot of influence in how you approach the job search. You have a leadership opportunity in those workshops that we do.
They just have to see themselves at that.
But we don't see ourselves as leaders.
Well, that's where it comes, when you mentioned earlier about making people kind of recognize their strengths and what they bring and their confidence, and you building up confidence and all of that. That's where all that comes into play, I would imagine. Let's talk a little bit about just leadership advice. What is some? What's your best, one or two pieces?
my best advice. One thing I often find I'm telling people is focus, clarity, and brevity.
Oh. I like that. You didn't say brevity at first. But
no,
I
didn't.
Focus
but
clarity,
focus, clarity, and brevity.
Okay.
I've never had anybody say, "Oh, I wish my boss would just talk more." Could he just spend a little more time telling us what No, brevity is important. There's a book out that I think is really good. It's written by 3 people that I've worked with, good friends actually. It's called Head, Heart, and Guts.
Head, Heart, and Guts. Okay.
Head, Heart, and Guts, being a whole leader.
Oh, okay.
And what their premise is that up until, 15, 20 years ago, companies, if you look back, were really hiring head leaders. They were smart. They were the smartest people in the world. They went to Yale. They went to Harvard, but we're finding with so much change happening in the world and the amount of ambiguity and diversity and challenges that are happening that there's also a need for heart, understanding people, emotional intelligence, and guts, being able to make the tough decisions and having courage and knowing your values. And so sometimes I'll use that as a frame to talk to people, because you can get really caught up in saying, well, but I'm so smart, and I know everything. And there's other aspects to being really a balanced leader.
Yeah. Sounds like we need to highlight that book. Head, Heart, and Guts.
Head, Heart, and Guts.
I want to make sure that we do that. As we wrap up, I want to thank you.
Oh,
you're
welcome. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been great. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your advice to our viewing audience. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And to our television audience, if you are in job transition or looking for job search support, visit the Community Career Center at 1815 West Dill Road, Suite 900 in Naperville, or search us on the web at communitycareercenter.org. Thanks so much for watching.